Happy Thursday, socialites. Welcome to the best damn social club in the universe. I am your host, Jedi ASU, and welcome to another edition of the social club. And we are here with my man, Namle. We're going to go ahead and talk about something that's a little bit different from anything else and that we are going through. And so we'll go ahead and jump into it. And we have Nam Le. Are you there? Did I get that right?
Yes.
Excellent.
The second time's the charm.
That's
As they
right.
say.
I am glad you were able to do that because I was doing my intro and I could kind of see you in my Zoom, and fortunately your voice wasn't coming over. But I'm like, wait, I got to get this one
Yeah.
right.
No, you're good.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Nam. Everybody.
My man Nam, and I think I have something to admit. I think you are my first Cal follow. I don't think there. It might have been Golden Blogs that I had followed initially, but I think you were one of the non-branded or whatever it is,
Yeah.
one of the first individual accounts that I've ever followed from Cal. So I think that's why I've kind of gravitated towards you and the rest of your crew. So I think that's
Thank you. That's very humbling. Especially because I have no credentials or no reason to be one of, if I can say that without sounding like immensely like full of myself, like one of the conversation drivers in the community, right? Like if you go around and you're like, hey, do you know Nam? And you're a Cal football fan, most people will know who I am. And that's very weird for me, right? Like one, to be able to say that, and two, because I have no credentials for being here. See, Jedi, for those, like, you probably don't recognize this, but basically in 2013 when Sonny Dykes showed up,
yes.
I was a senior on campus, and I basically stacked my schedule so I could go to all the practices and tweet everything that was going on.
Okay.
And that's how I made my name, right? Like I
Oh,
just
that's
showed up
cool.
every single day. Nobody paid me to be there.
Right.
And so, that momentum has continued, and it's very, very weird to me. I get recognized in places sometimes, including once on the floor of a bathroom at Husky Stadium during a 2.5 hour thunder delay. Like, so it's very cool to see what's come out of this, and I never take it for granted the connections in the community that I've been able to have.
That's very cool. No, I appreciate that as well because I think that's one of the things that I was doing as well. Because I mean, given the whole um, political layout and even compounded by the COVID-19, I think most of 2020 I've trashed not much of my reputation, but I know it's definitely hurt my brand. But I said what I said and I meant it, and so that's why we're here. And you know, it doesn't bother me. I think, like you said, I was very protective of it for a very long time, but I think it didn't feel right not speaking up, saying something, given all that. So I know that there's some things out there, but you know what, on to bigger and better. And if it's something they can't take, then you know, I'm sorry to see you go.
It's really unfortunate to know that something like people's humanity and health is like a almost like a politicized issue,
Yeah.
but we are not here to talk about that. I know you
No.
called me this week uh, to just kind of fill some space, form some connection around things that are not just sports. I know you wanted to talk about aliens and space and all kinds of other things about whatever's going to happen over the next 45 minutes to an hour.
Well, I think it was based on the question that I asked you, and I
Yeah.
absolutely loved your answer. Not only just because of it was the way you answered it, it was absolute fire, right? And if I had more creative editing skills, I would actually replay that. But the question was, if you had to see one of these three things, what it would be: UFO, ghost, or Bigfoot. And it was an emphatic and immediate UFO. And I agree, not only because Bigfoot, okay, not a big deal, and a ghost would probably scare the crap out of me. But at least a UFO is there's a lot more intrigue to it. There's intrigue to ghosts, but that'll be a different episode. But UFOs, I mean, there were some very cool points that you made. So given if you did see a UFO, what would it be? So jump into it.
So just to kind of recap some of the like this was like literally a throwaway segment on last week's conversation, right? Like you and me just talked about COVID and like what the implications that has for the Pac-12, for
Yep.
Cal and whatnot. But like for me, the way that I think about it is if we knew for sure that we were not alone in the universe, the main appeal of that is like, one, technologically, they must have access to things that we don't have,
Right.
right? To be able to do faster than light speed travel, to be able to communicate with us and whatnot. And maybe they're even a form of life that doesn't obey the laws for life that we are currently aware of here
Right.
on this planet and in our solar system. So I think the massive technological and like biological implications are there. And then I think that it has the highest potential for changing the way that we live our lives as a society,
Mm.
right? Like
Right.
we at that point recognize, hey, I think it's something that we say a lot, right? Like there is a human race,
Mhm.
but we get bogged down on our political, our social, our class, our gender, our sexual differences.
Right.
But when we recognize for sure that we're not alone and we could be part of a galactic federation of other creatures, other life forms,
Right.
I think that may bond us together as a folk that maybe doesn't currently exist. And so I think it
Agreed.
has the highest chance to change the way that we live.
I think it would be dramatically different as to how it would impact us, not only as a society, different governments and everything else, but have you ever read or heard of the Brookings Report?
Have not.
Okay, so back in the late 40s, early 50s, the Brookings Institute wrote this whole article, not article, it was a paper based on theoretically extrapolating how would the planet react if aliens did make an appearance publicly to everyone at once, right? And it was everything that you'd imagine. Actually, it was all chaos. It was people were bits of society were falling apart. There would be whole swaths of religions, you know, collapsing, right? There would be a lot of dread. There would be a lot of hope, but everything, the yes, all boiled down to that the chaos that one event would bring would be so devastating that it would, just set people back. Like you said, I think it's from, and again, it depends on how they appear, right? How the appearance happens really depends on how we as humans would react, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always, I don't, other than E.T., I don't think there's any other movie in which aliens are here to help us.
You can name a lot of movies though in which aliens are here to like mess things up for us,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Independence Day, I think, is one of the most famous examples of that, right?
Hmm.
And I guess it's true. I guess it is true, right? Like I'm basing my vision of this off of the fact that life that's coming to us may not necessarily be hostile,
Right.
or perhaps, in fact, in kind of like an Ender's Game type of scenario,
Right.
we're the aggressors. Like
Yes.
we're the baddies. And maybe my faith in this answer has a lot more to do with the fact that I assume and I place
Hmm.
some level of optimism in the fact that we are uh it's peaceful contact. Now, I may change my answer if I know that, oh, okay, it's aliens and they're here to destroy us because
Right.
I have no I would say I have very little faith in the current technological capabilities of man to actually, like I've seen enough kaiju like movies to think that the scope of what an alien could bring
Right.
wouldn't be it's not going to be taken down by F-34, F-35 type thing, you
No.
know.
It's going to be that newer technology that they're hiding that's 30, 40 years down the road. And
Yeah.
again, that's kind of like that's the hope springs eternal, right? That's like talking about, the Avengers are going to come in and cure COVID for us, right? It's like maybe it doesn't exist, right? And
Yeah.
that's always the key. But I mean, the other flip side of it, though, to your point, and I've always loved this one, was District 9.
Yeah.
That was a whole, okay, these ships came in and they landed, they ended up going to Jayberg, Johannesburg, and they were just a bunch of refugees, right? They weren't even in any state to help humanity, right? We actually had to help them and set up slums and everything else and take care of them best we could, right? So that's the whole other thing, right? Are we gonna encounter, aliens that are adrift and can't take care of themselves for whatever reason, right?
Yeah,
So it's it. But to your point again, these are all movies and
yeah,
these are all stories, right? Because I absolutely adored Ender's Game, the book. Um,
yeah.
there was a
Oh
lot.
my god, the movie. Let's just do a thing about how much we hated Ender's Game, the movie, right? Steven Spielberg and Asa Butterfield, like, bless your hearts, right? Like, you tried your best, I'm sure, but I've never been so let down by a property. Actually, that's not true. There's Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I guess M Night Shyamalan is
Oh,
here
that
for
one.
me, right? But
Right.
a property that I loved so dearly as a child that just got butchered. Ender's Game is probably somewhere in that top 5 for me.
It was pretty bad because there were some key points that they included in there, but Ender's Game spans 5 or 6 year block of his life, right? And so when I first read Ender's Game, Padawan 2, he was 7 years old or 5 or 7. Whenever Ender first left home in the book is how old Padawan 2 was. So it just kind of like struck me, right? Like, what would it be like if, he was as brilliant as as Ender was, but also they go ahead and they take him away. I'm like, how that was very emotionally
Yep.
tiring. But there was a lot of, the whole thing with his brother and sister and how they were able to use the nets to do, you know, political conversations and everything else. So it was a lot missing, and I think that's what was so disappointing. But hopefully, like a Netflix or a Amazon picks it up and they turn it into like a mini series and then like kind of cover the whole thing. I think that's where it gets a chance. I never read the sequels though. Did you read
Yeah.
did you?
I have some familiarity with the Ender's Shadow. Like, so I've read both of those. I've been meaning to. It's just something that I haven't really had a chance to do because even though I'm an English teacher, I don't read as much as I would like.
Right.
Um, but the Ender's Shadow also sets up kind of like a parallel storyline with Bean as like a
Mm,
character that is, if I remember correctly, like he's basically a genetic experiment that's like unlocked to his highest potential.
mm,
And so he's like a super genius that's going to keep growing until his like his body like short circuits essentially. And
interesting.
at the end of it, Bean, who is a part of Ender's original like
Right.
team,
He's
uh,
his first
he
friend, I think.
yeah,
Right?
he
Yeah.
travels through space like at faster than light speed because you, again, theoretically, based off of traditional uh,
Right.
physics and what we know might happen, would age more slowly. So he's kind of like
Yes.
drifting through the universe. Um, and that's about as far as I'm familiar with, right?
Okay.
Like it's a really fascinating uh, place, I think, for a visual storyteller to like really
Hmm.
dip into.
Right.
And I would love to see that story done justice.
Absolutely. It's a brilliant story. It has a very good military mind to it. I think it's very well written. It makes you like Bonso. You hated him in the movie as it was, but it just you hated him more in the book. And I think there was some things that he did in the book that they couldn't, but I think it was the way they handled it was brilliant. But I think, it was I missed the backstory between his brother and sister. I think that was key to paint the larger picture, but I think the movie was just okay. We're just going to focus on Ender purely. It's like, all right, if you have to, but that's always a hope. That's always a hope that they get to bring that one back. But that's the other.
If
Go ahead.
if anybody is listening to the 42 Social Club that like has a tie with Amazon or Netflix or HBO, like just know that we're pushing heavily for this. And I think maybe for people who don't know, is it okay if I do like a quick 30-second pitch on like this book series and
Oh
what
yeah,
that's about for
absolutely.
folks?
Please.
Just in case people have not heard of the Ender's Game like book series universe, basically humanity was invaded a while ago uh, by aliens, and so as a result of that, they've been picking up very gifted children and taking them to space and training them for a future war that the kids don't know that they're going to be involved in,
Right.
by way of battle simulation. So it's like Harry Potter, but in space, and maybe a little bit more. Like the scope is larger since we're dealing with an entire universe, is how I
Right.
would put it.
Yes. No, I think that's dead on, right? And there's a lot of military boot camp training focus on a lot of that. And there's, you know, one of the leads, if you watch the movie, just watch the movie for grins. It really doesn't give you anything. But the lead, played by Harrison Ford, really recognizes the potential in Ender, but then he always kind of turns his back on him. Not just because he hates him, but it's to make him stronger, right? And so it's just there's a lot of that type of how are you doing this to a child and everything else, but then you can see how he grows and how he thinks, and like you said to the point, it's like he's a lot more brilliant than a lot of people really think, and so you see that brilliance in the book to the point where it kind of the last third, right? Not only do they go ahead and fight the aliens at their alien planet, but then there's a whole mutiny in the end as well. So there's all kinds of intrigue at the end of the book that you're kind of like, I'm almost done, and you kind of like look at what's left in the book and you're like, dang, they're gonna wrap all this up, and he does. It's Scott Card, I think, is the author.
Orson Scott Card, yeah.
Yeah, and so it does a brilliant way of doing it. And it's a beautiful standalone, but again, with the other ones out there, then it definitely helps out as well. But I think to your original point, what you're saying, if the aliens do come, because all the movies are very human perspective, right, or human thought. It's like they're or human esque in the sense of how they're living, what's wrong, and everything else. And I don't know if there's been a movie that kind of actually does treat it as a pure alien approach, right? Not warlike, not hostile, just a complete cold, just cold and calculating. I mean, I don't know if there's been a story like that. I'm trying to rack my. I was thinking about it. I wasn't sure.
I think part of why something like that wouldn't be more popular is like Hollywood audiences want to see humanity as the hero, right? Like you
Right.
run a test screening in which we're the baddies, right? Like nobody feels good about that. That becomes like that's not going to get something that's like a major Hollywood backing just because.
I'd
And
watch
I
it.
don't want to turn this into, I know, right?
Oh,
But
I'd love
like
those kind of movies.
that kind of nuance though, I think is lost on a majority of folk who want to go to the movies for a certain type of escapism
Right.
that feels good, right? Like
Right.
nobody wants to go to escape to a worse universe,
Is that? But I mean,
so to
I'm
speak.
kind of into that though. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm okay with if it get like the end of Terminator 3 as and I didn't like the movie Terminator 3, but at the end of Terminator 3 they show us losing and they nuke the planet. I'm like, and that's how it ends. I'm like, okay, I'm all right with the sad ending. I
we
mean,
we earned that.
exactly. And but I was like, okay, maybe that's the case, right? Because even Battle Los Angeles, have you seen that one?
I've not.
So that one's interesting too because it's a full-on invasion, right? Going in, and then all of a sudden, as always, we're getting our ass kicked, and then all of a sudden they figure something out, and then we're able to win the day. But there's always something that I'm just like, isn't there a story out there where, oh, I know what it was. There is a movie in which we lose, and Childhood's End by I don't know if it's Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke. I can't remember,
Mhm.
but
Two big sci-fi legends though, so
yes,
you like in between them you have like the entirety of the genre
exactly.
almost.
Yes, exactly. And so one in Childhood's End, it's literally that. It's the story of the end of humanity, and these aliens that came in to kind of bring up a generation of children that would help facilitate the destruction of the earth. One person they allow one human to survive, and they say, okay, what do you want from this? And it's like, well, is there anything that's going to remain here in this this spot in the universe that says, you know, humanity existed here. And he's like, well, no, but we can leave a marker if you like. And it's like, okay, can you leave? And he said, okay, please put a marker with one of Mozart's pieces. So this way, whenever some alien race travels near the area, they will be able to at least hear the music of humanity, which is that one song. But that was the one thing where it's like, yeah, no, it was the planet's ending, period. So it was like, again, one of those where I'm like you said, it's a worse universe, but I don't know, for some reason it just, maybe it makes me more appreciate more that, okay, I'm done with this and I can close the book and put it away, or not. But I don't know. That's what I was
I
thinking.
I love the way that you like gave kind of a synopsis of that because it really made me think, and it's not a piece that I've read
Okay.
yet, but it really made me think about the nature of like how we conceptualize life, right? As
Right.
humans, knowing that we have a relatively finite like lifespan,
Right.
like if you're lucky, you'll make it to triple digits, but
Right.
eventually, like there is this finite like time span in which we live that
Hmm.
philosophically people have wrestled with for millennia, right? Like how
Right.
do we attribute meaning to something like that? And what's really fascinating to me and what's really like just tickles my fancy about aliens is like you might have access to an alternate reality and alternate philosophies
Right.
because they might theoretically be able to live on a longer time scale or on like um very different conditions
Yes.
than which humanity can do, right? Like, and like if you knew that your lifespan was going to be 1,000 years instead of 100 years, right?
Right.
And I think that gives rise to a very different way of living that's just
Oh, absolutely.
very interesting to me. Like, like, if we could know that that was possible, would that make us more reckless? Would that make us less reckless? Because you want to preserve your chances of living to that 1,000 years. It's just a
Right.
very different way of conceptualizing living that I'm very interested in.
I think that's actually a very good point, because I think as humans, we're always wanting to, how do we live longer than what we did? Because, I mean, biblically, right, you have Moses living 900 years, right? You have all these other stories of everyone else. And again, this is kind of the ghosts, right? Is that something that allows you to go ahead and live longer? But I think that's, are we going to be able to figure out that technology to be able to live longer? Because physically, I should say, because what is it? Is it upload? You know, and I think
Oh,
transcendence.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because I actually have watched Upload.
See,
So
I haven't, and but
yeah,
the kid, but to that point, right? And we'll talk about
yeah,
it. Is like, is that the way we're trying to? Is that the nouveau way of how we're going to live forever? Right?
yeah.
Is upload ourselves into the cloud, which is just someone else's computer, and then we just bounce or putz around that way, or Altered Carbon. Have you seen that on Netflix?
It's on my queue right
Okay.
now, and so I know we're dancing. So what's really fun to me about this conversation is like we're throwing around different like pillars of like modern
Yes.
sci-fi, or in the case of Upload, like sci-fi comedy type things.
Right.
Uh, but like I keep getting intrigued at the ways in which we're like describing them to each other like on
Right.
the fly and like just able to still carry a thread through despite not
Absolutely.
not having seen those things. um anyway, I
No,
interrupted you.
that's fine. No, because it makes, but to your, I agree, right? Because we're able to bounce off these ideas that still feed the main thought of living forever. Because in Alter Carbon, there are people, they run around in sleeves, and a sleeve is a cloned human body. But what happens is that your consciousness, your existence, is actually is in a piece of technology called a stack, and this thing plugs into the base of a sleeve, and then you become, so the very wealthy have their stack backed up to the cloud, and then they are always able to, if they die physically, they have a clone that they'll someone will grab the, restore the stack, plug it in, and then they'll come back to life, and they'll be an actual physical person, right? So, but that is based, as I understand it from the show, and I think it's actually a comic book series originally,
Yeah.
is that that's another way of how it's extending the life. So extending the life of a human. So is that really, the only way we're going to be able to extend the life of a human is with alien technology or uploading ourselves or Star Trek, right, where it's pure cryonics and we have Khan running around all over the damn place. I don't know, right? And maybe that's the case. I think that's why I love science fiction so much. Is not only does it allow you to exist in an alternate plane that could be, but they just some of the writers are so brilliant in the way they just predict the technology and how humans will interact with it as well, because it's always so spot on.
My gut instinct, right? And this is not something I've necessarily paid a lot of thought to, but like my gut instinct is um I think that once your original mind and body like are separated from each other,
Hmm.
right? Let's say that your consciousness gets transferred into another human being, right? Like I retain all my I think at that point you're no longer like the same person,
Okay.
right? I think it's that match between body and consciousness that creates unique like
Interesting.
identity. But that's just like my gut instinct, like based off of what I heard. But I might have to think about it a little bit more.
Because it's an interesting way of thinking about it, right? Because you're saying that the mental chemistry that defines your consciousness does change, because if you are in a separate physical body,
Yeah,
the chemistry in that body is different. Now,
yeah.
how do we, again, that's part of, I think, hopefully something I get to see in my lifetime, but it's like, are we able to figure out that chemistry and ensure its consistency, right? Because again, and then to that end, right, if we figure out the chemistry, or do we figure out the electronic pattern, so then this way you can upload yourself, because then if you're able to understand the programmatic layout of your consciousness, then it's just a series of ones and zeros. Or in quantum computing, it's what is that, AC and G, or whatever the DNA
Yeah,
sequence is,
yeah.
right? So is that, right, what you become is just a whole series in a multidimensional matrix of letters.
It might be for me, like coming from a humanities background, that I attach some romance to this, right? But
Okay.
let's say that you, Jedi, die and you're reborn and you respawn.
Right.
Your consciousness is the same. You regained your same memories, and you just float out of a tube. Same body, same fresh haircut, same
Right.
freshly shaven face. Yeah,
Yeah, the
to
clone's got to
me,
have the hair and the shaven, because I don't
yeah,
want.
like to me, that's not the same thing because you would know that you're not the original, right? Like if you have the consciousness that you're living in a second lifetime, then you're no longer the same person. But that's just how I would look at it personally.
So now here I have another movie for you. Moon. Did you see that one with Sam Rockwell?
No,
So
but I have heard of his work. I think.
so
Let
Sam
me Google
Rockwell, yeah. So Sam Rockwell is Tony Stark's nemesis in Iron Man 2, Justin Hammer.
it. Mhm.
So Moon is about this man who's on the moon, and there's an energy company that is mining regolith and sending it back down to Earth. So you're up there for months at a time to do your gig, and then after the months you get sent home. So what happens is that he he has an accident. He has an accident. He's chasing something. He's chasing something. He sees something in the distance on the moon, chases it, hits something, hits an antenna. It falls down. He gets buried in all this moon rock, and then he dies. He dies there. But what happens is that he wakes up. The next scene is that he wakes up. All right. Well, what happens is that there's a I think it's I want to. I don't think it's Gertie. I could be the robot that's his companion. Gertie is played by oh gosh, I'll remember his name. But anyway, cares for him. Oh, you're doing okay and everything else. So what happens is that um Sam Rockwell is a clone. So what happened was is that they engineered this human to that they could recycle every time. So if something happened to him, he would go to sleep. They would incinerate the clone, and then a new clone would appear and then resume, thinking he only had 2-3 weeks to go on his contract. So to your point, right? There was one scene where he was actually able to break communication because it was a radio blackout. He was able to break communication, and he had a picture of his daughter. His daughter was a little girl. He
Yeah,
broke communication, dialed down to Earth. She was a teenager, and what happened was is that he saw himself in the background. The original guy was alive on Earth still, and
yeah,
and then what happened eventually? You ended up having two or three, because then what happens? The clone went and rescued the first clone, and
yeah.
then they revived a third clone. So there was three guys and the original guy on Earth. So it was just, but they were all the same guy. They were all, like you said, they were the same guy and believed they were because they were a clone and they had the same consciousness and everything else. So it was just, it's a very, like you said, to your point, it's, are you, if you're a clone, and I think you are, it just depends. They had different personalities. Some were funnier, some were
But
more.
yeah, but like they had a different set of experiences at that point, right? Like, so you've diverged from whatever like seed person that you have, right? Like I die and I have a clone, and that clone experiences different things than me. They're no longer me, even though I was the seed for them. You know what
Right.
I'm saying?
And
Like, even if they look like me or whatever, it's just like what makes me me. At least in the conception that I think about it is, I lived this finite lifespan,
right.
and even if I'm allowed to extend it, and I think that finiteness is essential to what we consider humanity,
Hmm.
right? Like knowing that it's going to end, and not like some tuck everlasting type of thing where I sip like a. I actually asked my dad about this when he was like, in his 40s, like I because I was like in the fifth grade, I was
Right.
like, so bad, would you take this like thing? And he's like, yeah, I'm young enough to continue working and be healthy and whatnot.
Right.
And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And like I would love to live a long multi-hundred-year life so that I
Hmm.
could experience all the things that I want to do, but I want to be able to call it quits,
Okay.
and I think that finiteness is really important, because if I pass to the end, and I don't know how you feel about this necessarily, but if I pass to the end and then I restart and I'm aware that it's ended and I've begun again, like
Yeah.
I don't think I'm the same person any longer.
Right. No, that's fair. And that's interesting too because I don't know if that's necessarily the case because then we'd
Yeah,
have some people running around like that. Although there are some people that talk about past lives, right? No, I
yeah.
remember this and I remember that. That may be the case. But to your point, right, about being able to live forever and call it quits, right? There's two other movies. Did you ever see Jupiter Ascending or
I've never even heard of that one.
Jupiter Rising? Let me make sure.
I'm googling
Jupiter,
it right now.
right? Jupiter Ascending. It's with Mila Kunis.
I actually saw the trailer for this, and I thought that it was like, I thought it was gonna be a big deal, right? Like I watched this trailer, let's see, 2015, right? Like I remember seeing this, and I was like, wow, this looks really cool. I just never got around to it, but it
Yeah.
just looked like it had all the elements of like a. I really like these like big projects that are very ambitious. Like Cloud Atlas struck me in the same way. Another movie that I was
Oh,
like, the trailer looks really good, but
did you not see it?
I'm guessing. Yeah, I'm guessing you didn't
Okay.
like it.
So, two things. So, Jupiter Ascending, there are some very good spots and there are some very horrific spots. But it revolves around, and it's similar to, it's almost a nod to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's one line in there. It's like Earth is a very small part of a very large universal system. And so I don't want to ruin. It's again what happens is that they grow life on planets, then they harvest all the life on this planet to create a fluid that extends your life. It actually renews you, and so that's the business. But this is the whole thing about how it's going. So It's not the best movie. I like the idea, but it works out real well, right? So that's one of them. But the other movie that I'm trying to think through is, oh, the next this is another one that I absolutely love, and oh, I got another one about cloning, but it's similar to Aliens. But this one that I'm talking about is extending life in time with Justin Timberlake.
Yes.
That's the other one, right? Like you said, do I want to live forever? You're at a particular age, but now, depending on how well you earn or how hard you're able to work or save your time, that allows you to live at a particular age indefinitely.
Yeah. First of all, I want to shout out the Wachowski sisters. For producing obviously the Matrix, which doesn't really fall within the scope of this discussion, but I just wanted to appreciate that as their
That's going to
crowning
be our.
achievement.
That's going to be our. What is it? That's going to be another show. What do we
Oh
call it?
my god.
What is
Actually,
it?
I've been meaning to do a
Dystopias.
Matrix. Yeah, I've been
It'll
meaning
be
to do a Matrix like rewatch.
this weekend
Just
on
because
AMC or IFC. It's on all three.
yeah,
Yeah,
I've been
man.
I've been I've been denying the existence of the second and third
Oh,
Matrix
really?
for a long time.
Okay.
I just think that the way that the third movie ends is like just I hate how like lollipop uh you literally cannot end in a more cliche way. Sun shines and rainbow, like come on, you
And
know?
then end scene. Why?
Yeah,
What are
like
you doing?
terrible. But I love a lot of that. It struck me as a child in '97, and it still holds up pretty well. Like the book,
The first one's
the bullet
brilliant.
time. Yeah. Um, so with that, and also like I'm struck by the fact that if we did have access to a technology that was created here on Earth that allowed us to, like, a lot of it reproduces either consciously or inadvertently like capitalist like
Yes.
structures, right? And the same thing that's true in upload, which
Okay.
troubles me somewhat, right? Like if we had the ability to do this for the entirety of humanity, I would hope, right, that we could actually give that opportunity to everybody, even though I know that maybe that's not
Right.
like the probabilities aren't in that favor.
It wouldn't go that way. You're absolutely right because again, it would be left. The very first people to take advantage of it would be the extremely wealthy. They would be able to, and then as time went on and technology got cheaper, for lack of a better word, then the upper middle class, the middle class, and then
Yeah.
eventually when it was like cricket cellular, then everyone would be able to start getting into it regardless. And I think that absolutely is the case, right? Is being able to take advantage of that. And so, and you see that as well in Jupiter Ascending. There's all the very wealthy are the people that can take advantage of it. But if you're not wealthy, then you're just dying, right? You're just supporting the system on your back.
Like Elysium also, and I
I
hate how
loved that
often.
movie.
Yeah, I remember having a good time watching it, but just like how often sci-fi ends up like you take the cast of Earth, right, and yet you fast forward it 1,000 years, and how often it ends up again inadvertently or consciously reproducing class biases,
Right.
race biases. Um, that can be kind of discouraging sometimes, right? Like, but I
Absolutely.
understand why sci-fi writers gravitate towards that, because like that's the background of like it's a easily projectable future
Right.
uh for humanity that just is like, even when we get all of these life-changing things,
Hmm.
whose life it ends up changing is always the people who already stand to benefit the most from that. And
Right.
it makes me, as a storyteller and as a imaginer of things, it's not really the best maybe wordsmithing way
I
to
know
put it.
what you're saying. I got you.
Like it makes me want to enter the space and just think it's like, yo, like what sci-fi stories are out there that could still be told that like imagine something different besides
Right.
a capitalist like structure, like a racist structure, a sexist structure. And um and that's maybe something that's not within the scope of this conversation, but it is something that comes to mind is because it's a very common thread that runs across all the movies that
Right.
we thought about.
And that's interesting too, right? Because I think the only one that I'm thinking of that kind of doesn't is Star Trek, right? I don't You don't see a lot of that class type of conversation within the Federation, if you will. They're always running around and finding other planets in which other people are still struggling with it, but I just you don't get a lot of that within you don't get that impression, right, within the Federation itself. I'm trying to rack my brain if that is the case, but that's the only one that I can think of, right? Because you even get it in Star Wars. There's a reason why. I mean, it's one big fat epic journey about war and death and everything else, right? So I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to be able to tell a great sci-fi story without having to pull in aspects that reflect human behavior or past human failures and or accomplishments?
I'm really glad that it actually ended up returning me here because originally when you mentioned Harrison Ford as a part of like Ender's Game, I
Yes.
was gonna throw out a like very spicy Star Wars take to you.
Sure.
You know, but before I get to that, I want to
Mm-hmm.
mention like I have zero background with Star Trek. Like
Okay.
it's just always seemed, and again, this may be the fact that I am a 28-year-old, right? Like, but Star Trek has always seemed, and I maybe missed the prime boat for Star Trek,
Okay.
right? And I apologize if that's the case, but my perception of Star Trek, again, as a young millennial, is the fact that it is not cool. Like, I've just never
Oh,
seen Star
interesting.
Trek as a cool property. So as
Okay.
a child, I never even had like a pat because it's like Star Wars is cool, right? The appeal of Star Wars
Well,
is
yeah.
very easy. Gigantic ships, lasers, aliens,
Fights.
cool powers, like lightsabers. Hello, that's like the big one, right?
Right.
A lightsaber is way cooler than a phaser. I'm sorry. Like there's something romantic about sword fights
It
that
is.
just replicate with space guns. I'm sorry. So with that being said, I know nothing about Star Trek. I have like
Okay.
okay, you could like I know who Picard and Kirk are and Sulu, right? Like
Right.
that's all I know.
Okay.
Okay? But my spicy Star Wars related take is I firmly believe this. The best Star Wars movie is Rogue One.
Yes. I'm not there. I see no lies detected.
Oh
No
God.
lies detected.
I'm so glad that this passed your check. You know, as somebody who has Jedi in their branding, their handle, their name, like I feel affirmed. I feel seen.
So you it's an honor because one, that was written by one of the guys that was on the original A New Hope. So he's from one of the original guys. But two, it takes a lot for me being an original fan because Empire Strikes Back is my gold standard. And when Rogue One came out, I'm like I was it's 1A 1B for me, and I can't even tell you which one is 1A because I absolutely adore both of them. But Rogue One was just such great storytelling on so many levels. Now, I will say I'd really like to know what they had originally versus all these reshoots. Because if you remember the line in one of the early trailers, she says, I rebel. And it never made it into the movie. Right. Based on that one line in the trailer where she says, I rebel, her whole, what's the word, demeanor in that trailer versus what ended up in the movie was completely different. So I desperately want to know what they did originally, but it was still brilliant storytelling. And it wasn't all you didn't have to have a Jedi running around saving them all with a lightsaber, right? You still had Chirrut Imwe running around
Shout
as
out
a
to Sharon Emway.
yeah, running around as a believer, which was even more cool, right? Because that he almost for me encompassed everything I was as a kid because I wanted to believe and I wanted to act like a Jedi, and even though I didn't have the skills, I believed I could. And I'm one with the Force and the Force is with me, right? And I just absolutely love that whole thing. And each one had great stories to themselves, so and just the scale and the graphics and just all of it was fantastic. So no, you are right. Rogue
Oh
One.
God,
But that's the
that's
other
such
but that's the other thing too, and this is probably going to have to be our third episode is
right.
The Last Jedi, right?
Yeah.
Ranking that one in there as, as an old someone from the old guard versus, just trying to wrap my head around it without being too judgmental. I'm still trying to embrace it.
Yeah.
So that's my thing. But
Okay. Okay. This would we might have to do like a returning conversation series, right? Like just
I'm
whatever. We'll
down.
come on for yeah. So I know we're reaching about the end of the hour, and honestly, like I have to go to the bathroom really badly. Um, so last points that I just want to make is we have delved into a lot of really interesting space here, right? Like living forever, the implications of UFOs.
Absolutely.
We did a whole bunch of sci-fi movies that I need to watch at some point, right? And now we're dipping into like our shared turf, right?
Yes.
As Star Wars, and obviously like I'm a little bit more casual with my passion about that than you, right?
Right.
But um, I think that Star Wars has been its best for me
Okay.
when it's been allowed some freedom to breathe away from those main pillars of Luke
Okay.
Skywalker, right? Like the further that it's allowed to get away from that has been the most interesting stuff for me. And
Like,
I'm not just talking about Rogue One, but also The Last Jedi, which again is a strange movie, I know, for a lot of traditionalists, but
yeah.
I feel to me like that opens up the most interesting narrative ground. And again, my first real Star Wars movie as a child was Phantom Menace. It's one of the first movies
Okay.
that I ever watched in
Yep.
theaters, right?
Right.
And yes, there's a huge appeal there because they have giant like like that's for the kids. I get that,
Absolutely. It was.
right? But you also got Maul, who like set some new precedent, right? Like you got the
One of the
cool,
greatest
like
badasses up until Rogue One. He was like
yeah,
the badass Jedi, and then you saw Darth Vader slaughter everyone. You're like, it's back to Darth Vader now.
yeah, it's back to Darth Vader. But I think that maybe we schedule some rewatches and just be like, hey, let's re-update our stances on these films. But I think that Star Wars is its best, and I know they're making more Star Wars movies because God, what do you pay 4 billion for if not to make more of this property, right? But
As someone
I
of
hope,
as someone as part of the old guard, I know you're wiggling and you're doing the pee pee
yeah.
dance like they do in Teen Titans.
I wish you didn't say that on air, but yes.
Um, yes, I am actually desperate for them to move away from the whole Skywalker line. I want to see something completely different away from all of that because it's such a big universe. So anyway, I agree.
All right, Jedi.
I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation and a wonderful hour of just shooting the shit,
It
right?
goes by
Like
quick. I know it.
it does. It sure does.
But we will make this one a regularly scheduled programming. Yes, thank you, Nam, Ham,
Nam.
Nam. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have to think that through.
Hey,
So
it's all good, right? Like you know who I am. Like the pronunciation of my name is just a bonus.
I may actually just start calling you Mr. Leb because
Yeah.
I do better with the last names. But anyway, I know you got to go. I appreciate you.
All right.
And again, we will talk more in virtually. Have a wonderful second day of school, man.
All right. Cheers. Thank you
See
so
you. Thanks,
much.
man. We'll talk in a bit. Bye. And thank you to everyone that was able to stay on. I appreciate you all. Mr. Horn, Steen, I appreciate you. I think you're talking about the end of the Star Wars series, especially the last trilogy where they had to go ahead and play to some old fans, me being one of them, because I remember there were multiple times in that movie when I cried just because, again, the nods. But yes, so yeah, we're gonna do this one a little bit more consistently, a little bit more frequently. I enjoyed the conversation with Nam. It was great to be able to just bounce ideas and everything else, and just have a good conversation. And it broke up the week, and so hopefully you had a good time as well. Tomorrow we have the resplendent Kalen Jones tomorrow being able to talk with us and share his feedback at ASU. He covered Texas football, so we'll see how crazy that was, and also talk about his new gig. I believe he's covering NFL and doing some NBA work. So, yes, Rogue One. Yeah, so it was. Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Right, he had to be They had to back engineer right that whole end to make sure it fit. seconds into episode 4. So no, that absolutely makes sense. So yes, but thank you everyone. I appreciate you just spending a little bit of time with Nam and I, and we'll continue to do this one and make sure this one is of good conversation, good topics. And if there's anything else you'd like to see, as always, send me a message on the Twitterverse. Make sure you subscribe to the 42 Social Club on YouTube. Once you subscribe, there's a little bell. Click on the bell, and then you'll get alerts as to when we go live or if I decide to post new highlights or new videos separate from anything else that we're doing as well. But again, I appreciate you. I love you. Make sure you love yourself and you love those around you. And even though we're only going to we'll see each other again in under than 24 hours. But again, as always, remember, stay social.